Hello and welcome to Bankruptcy Nerd Alert with June numbers and year to date. For a bankruptcy nerd, this is like Christmas in July where we get to talk about all the numbers. So if you're as nerdy as I am, then I am glad to have you here and hope you all kinds of fun things from this update. So let's jump into the actual numbers for July or for June. So it says June over June are the numbers we have here. So let me get my trusty numbers up so you can see them. And let's look at that. There we go. See, hopefully everyone can see that. I will turn off my video so my really yellow background isn't distracting. But who am I? My name is Jen Lee. I am a bankruptcy nerd or the bankruptcy nerd these days. And I teach lawyers how to add bankruptcy as a practice area, full workshop to add bankruptcy to a firm. It is a really good time to add bankruptcy because the demand is going up and it's a practice area that is counter-cyclical. So when the economy is not doing so well, bankruptcy does well. So sometimes it sounds like I'm cheering, but I'm really not. It's more that I want people to have the help they need when they need it. And so I have a full workshop to add bankruptcy. I have support staff training. We have a 6-hour support staff training that we do. Bankruptcy Toolbox is a community that I run and do daily updates in, and Launchpad as well is for lawyers who are thinking outside the box. All of that is at lawyersuccessnetwork.com. So let's jump into the numbers. Super nerdy, all kinds of fun. So for commercial chapter 11s, and for those of you who may not have seen this before, I do year over year by the month, first of all, because usually looking from one month to the next in the same year isn't as telling as year over year. So from June 25th to June 20, from 2025 to June 2026, commercial chapter 11s were up 29%. If you remember last month in May, there actually was a decrease in commercial chapter 11s. And I think a lot of that is due to cycles and preparing cases and when they get filed. So June was back to what we've been seeing is pretty big increases. Subchapter 5, which is that part of chapter 11 that's intended for small businesses, that has a debt limit on it and is more streamlined than a regular chapter 11, had a 28% increase in June, which was lower than May. May's was a 36% increase. But still, we're very much seeing the effects of small businesses struggling right now. And that is showing up in the bankruptcy numbers. There have been a ton of articles I've shared in Bankruptcy Toolbox about the debt, the amount of debt that people are carrying and interest rates. And so all of that information is showing a lot of stress. And I feel like the canary in the coal mine sometimes. Individual chapter 7s from June 2025 to 2026 had a 15% increase. This is pretty much what we've been seeing is 15%, 10% increases, 20% increases. And individual chapter 7s are about 75% of individual cases that are filed. And so they tend to be the one everyone thinks of when they think of bankruptcy. It's the liquidation bankruptcy. And so those were up 15%. Chapter 13s were up 10%. And if you haven't heard about chapter 13s before, I like to explain chapter 13. It's a reorganization plan for individuals. So corporations do not file chapter 13. They can't file chapter 13. Small business owners can if they're sole proprietors, or sometimes they've a single member LLC type thing, but the individual files, not the business. So chapter 13s were up 10% from June 2025 to 2026. The thing to keep in mind with chapter 13s is that they require income in order to file them or make a plan. And so sometimes, I do mention this a lot, if we're seeing people not employed, it's the chapter 13 numbers aren't as high. We especially saw that during the beginning of COVID, where chapter 13 numbers dropped dramatically because people didn't have regular income. So total individual filings between June of last year to June of this year was a 13% increase, which makes sense because chapter 7 was at 15% and chapter 13 was at 10%. Because chapter 7 makes up about 75% of filings, that usually tends to be where it pulls that weighted average a little bit towards the chapter 7 number. So 13% increase overall. Again, what we've been seeing the past couple of years is increase upon increase. So now the really nerdy part that I get to get into is I love July. I love January. Sometimes the quarterly ones are fun too, but the half year ones and the full year ones are fun. So we're looking at the first half of 2026 versus 2025. And for the first half of 2025, just to be clear, it's the same January to June for both years. So we're comparing apples to apples. And the reason why I like to look at a little bit longer term is to see whether 1 month was an anomaly or if it's kind of holding steady. And what you're going to see here is it's pretty steadily increasing. Individual overall was at 12% increase. Chapter 7's 15% increase, which is exactly what we saw in June. And then chapter 13's an 8% increase. And so there, I believe in May, it was only a 3% increase for chapter 13's over last year. And so what we're seeing is those averages are being fairly consistent across a longer term. Last year was also up over 2024. So we're seeing increase on top of increase for the last, 2.5 to 3 years. The first half of 2026 versus 2025 for commercial. Subchapter 5, this is what I alluded to in my live stream announcement. 50% increase year over year for subchapter 5 from 2025 to 2026 for the first half. What that means is small business owners are increasingly coming into subchapter 5 cases as chapter 11 to reorganize debt. That is a fairly significant increase. There were a couple months it was way above 50%, and then there were a couple months where it was a little bit lower, but it's averaging so far as a 50% increase over year. Chapter 11 itself, commercial chapter 11s, clarify that, is at a 28% increase overall year over year for the first half. So definitely seeing that small business crunch in these numbers. Total filings there at the bottom, 12% increase. Total filings are interesting because there are very different economies at work sometimes between businesses and individuals. And so sometimes one will be really high and one will be not as high. And so it's always good to look at the individual trade lines or lines of business instead of just the overall filing, because you may not get the full picture of what industry or what practice area you are in. Do have some upcoming events that I would like to share. Tomorrow, I do have one spot open for Stop Sending Chapter 13s away, and that is for attorneys who already handled Chapter 7s, but you haven't dipped your toe into Chapter 13s. You want to, but right now you're referring them out. And there are a lot of attorneys who start out with Chapter 7s and then either add Chapter 13s or they don't. They decide not to do it. So if you're interested in adding Chapter 13, that workshop is tomorrow from 2 to 5 p.m. I have a couple of offers for that. You can do the workshop itself, or you can also add on 3 months of Bankruptcy Nerd in your pocket, which means you get to ask me all the questions you want for 3 months. You can add on to that. Monday, 7/13 is Hypo Hour. So every month in the Bankruptcy Toolbox, we have a Zoom where you get to throw all the crazy hypos out there that you have from your cases, and we talk through brainstorming them. And then this month in the Bankruptcy Business Lab, really on point right now is capacity planning without guessing. And so every month in the Bankruptcy Business Lab, there is a training that gets posted in about the first week of the month. And then towards the end of the month, we all get on Zoom and talk about the topic that we're working on. And capacity planning is a really good discussion right now because bankruptcy attorneys are really busy. And how do we plan for that capacity increase? What tools are we using and that kind of thing? So that's all at bankruptcytoolbox.com. And then if you want to add bankruptcy, give me a call. I help lawyers add bankruptcy from start to finish in their firm. You get full recorded access. I do live versions that you get full live access to. And I do a lot of bankruptcy nerd mentoring. I love it. This past week, I've had a couple of attorneys reach out and we've gone through their first couple of harder cases and it's been really fun. So that is your bankruptcy nerd alert for June and the first half of 2026. And stay tuned for more bankruptcy nerd alerts.